Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the State of Black America with MOBE Mondays.
Good evening. My name is Yvette Moyo, and we're so happy to have you here this evening. This is the first day of Black History Month, and of course at MOBE, every day is an opportunity to move forward with a sense of history, purpose, and mission. Our mission with MOBE, Marketing Opportunities in Business and Entertainment, is to be an accelerator, a business, brand, and career accelerator. And we've been around almost 30 years. And we've been able to measure our impact in terms of really providing opportunities for our people, Black America, to see the best and brightest in the industry, to build from their examples and case studies of success, and to make that cash register ring. And I know that's an old phrase, but basically, bottom line, we count what we deliver to our registrants at our symposiums. And MOBE Monday is our COVID pivot. And we've had over 40 sessions and conversations where we say only at MOBE. We'll tell you more about that, or actually you can read more about that on our website. And as the founder and CEO of MOBE, I'm thrilled to have an expert group of professionals to talk about where we are today, the state of Black America, not from woe is me, but from an asset-based conversation on who we are. I'm a salesperson. I've been selling the beauty and the wonder of Black people for 40 years. And I'm so pleased. I have an African American Studies major, and so I'm so pleased to sign myself off and learn something from these experts. And leading the conversation is part of our MOBE family, our leadership team. Pepper Miller has been with us for a couple of many of our activities with brands and building business. That's another conversation about our Real Men Charities activities. And Real Men Charities is the nonprofit that actually presents MOBE. And Pepper Miller has seen our progression over the years and is part of our success story. And she leads us in so many ways and so many levels. She's a recognized leader in the industry of marketing, advertising, market research, and she's also an author. She's studied Black people, she's written about it. She is the go-to professional when it comes to understanding insights and issues about habits. She works for Fortune 500 companies as a consultant with her company. And the companies include Coca-Cola, McDonald's, AARP, Bravo, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, even the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and so many more. Pepper has co-authored What's Black About It with the late Herb Kent, and authored Black Still Matters in Marketing. She is considered just the expert, and she's a lovely, wonderful person. And her third book is coming for the culture, evolution, reevaluation, and insights to win the loyalty of Black America. And it will be released, I think, this year, actually.
We hope.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure and honor to introduce to you the lady that will lead this conversation, Ms. Pepper Miller.
Thank you, Yvette. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I'm excited to have a chat with this wonderful, esteemed panel. And to kick off our Black History Month.
I'm going to sign off and let the conversation continue.
All right, thank you. All right, okay. I'm going to begin with just some highlights from our panel's bios. They are extensive as their experience is as well. And I'm going to begin with our guests that are new to MOBE Mondays, Arva Rice and Bishop DeAndre Salter. So Arva Rice is the president and CEO of the New York Urban League. She's a passionate community leader dedicated to creating pathways of success for young people with a focus on girls and women in particular. She's a 2013-14 Annie Casey Fellow, a National Fellowship for Government and Nonprofit Leaders, focused on supporting innovation solutions. Her contribution is demonstrated by her contributions to New York Urban League is demonstrated by the 100+ years success and her leadership that directs a way for underserved African Americans to be educated, employed, and empowered across New York City's 5 boroughs. I was delighted to hear the empowerment message, Arva, in your bio. So thank you so much and welcome. Bishop DeAndre Salter is the youngest bishop in the state of New Jersey and the senior pastor of Impact Church in South Plainfield, New Jersey. Bishop Salter has a relentless, I love all this passion we have, a relentless heart to help people grow in faith, nurture their families, and become a vehicle for doing good. Bishop Salter is also a serial entrepreneur. He's a motivational speaker, certified financial expert, and he's the author of The Culture of Money, his new book, one of his newest books, and I ordered one this weekend, Bishop, and I can't wait to receive it. And the book really is a directive to the Black community to decrease our personal wealth gap while increasing our net worth. And I love that. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So no stranger to MOBE Mondays panels are my wonderful colleagues, clients, and friends of MOBE, Cheryl Grace and Tiyale Hayes. Cheryl is the Senior Vice President of Global Marketing and Consumer Engagement for Nielsen IQ and drive Nielsen's multicultural thought leadership strategy. She is a visionary behind Nielsen's award-winning African American Consumer Report, which celebrated its 10th year last year. That is wonderful, Cheryl. I use that information so much, and I was delighted to even work on the 2013 report with you. So congratulations. It's so important. Named one of the Black Enterprise's top 50 powerful women in business, Cheryl has been recognized with numerous national, regional, and local honors and featured in many publications. She is a bad you-know-what. Finally, we have the brilliant Tiyale Hayes, who was recently promoted to Senior Vice President of Brand Strategy and Marketing for BET Networks. And that his former position was Senior VP of Consumer Insights for BET. So Tiyale, congratulations on that. That's wonderful. Tiyale is a thought leader with a broad background in strategy development and a love, here's that passion again, a love for consumer understanding, consumer insights, and global innovation. In addition to strategy development, Tiyale's areas of expertise includes global team leadership, brand positioning, portfolio management, and he has delivered strong impact across many industries, including food and beverage, beauty, over-the-counter healthcare, and so much more. He's a frequent speaker. He's been here at MOBE too, and Cheryl has as well. For both private and industry conferences. And Tiyale has a bad Black Twitter presentation that is killer. It's absolutely fabulous, wonderful, engaging, and if anything, you should, remember that. So we have a lot of wonderful panelists with great products and services and passion for our community. Thank you again for taking the time to be here to share your insights and wisdom. So we're going to talk about the state of Black America, and I'm glad that the New York and the Urban League period just is letting us use this title because they have wonderful reports every year. But we're going to talk basically about a lot of issues from 3 overarching questions. Who and where is Black America today? That's the current situation of Black America. Where are we going? Where do we want to be? So where do we want to be in the future? And how does Black America get there realistically? So a colleague and friend of mine, George Fraser from FraserNet, said to me this summer that marketing will never be the same, and society in a way will never be the same as a result of 3 areas that I call disruptors: Trump, COVID, and George Floyd. So given these observations and from your personal professional experience, panel, who is, when we think about Trump, COVID, and George Floyd, plus all of our history, who is Black America today? What is the current situation? And how do we view the landscape and marketplace today of Black America? And who wants to, Arva, why don't you start? You and Bishop can start, because I'd like to, since you guys are working deep in the community, why don't you start? Arva, why don't you start?
Well, I thank you. Good evening to everyone who has joined us this evening. Thank you so much, Pepper, for hosting this conversation. And this is wonderful to be reconnected to Bishop DeAndre. I have not seen you in a long time. And Tiyale, we work together, and it's great. Cheryl, the Urban League nationally works with Nielsen a lot. So it's just wonderful. I feel like it's an old home week. So it's a wonderful to kind of be here. I had been thinking about this whole question of who we are right now. And when you put it in the context of Trump, COVID, and George Floyd, I was like, wow, that is really big. And it really is defining for this moment in time. And I was just having a staff meeting, and I said that no matter what happens with us going back to moving our programming from being digital, being online to, when we all have the vaccine or we're all in a place and space where we can walk around after COVID, we're going to be forever changed. And so it's like going to the airport. Remember, we used to go to the airport, you could go all the way up to the gate and give that loved one of yours a big hug, and then they could get on the plane. And that's just gone forever. Right, the way the paradigm has shifted for us, and so we have to look at things in different ways. When I think about who we are as Black, particularly New Yorkers, I run the New York Urban League. As you know, there's 90 urban leagues across the country. When I think about the New York landscape, Tiyale helped us to put together something called the State of Black New York, where we looked at Black New Yorkers and said, how are they doing right now? And the three words that really came out for me is that Black New Yorkers are incredibly resilient. We are resilient in the face of things like COVID, as we all know. And according to our State of Black New York, Black New Yorkers were twice as likely to die from COVID as our contemporaries. We are incredibly resilient in the face of the policies and the procedures and policies that have put in place through Trump. And even though they try to make our voting rights and try to strip them of us, we came out in Milwaukee, and we came out in Atlanta, and we came out in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. And so we're incredibly resilient when it comes to the Trump policies. And then when it comes to George Floyd, this was a moment of racial reckoning, and we will forever be changed because of it. And so I think that as New Yorkers, as Black New Yorkers, and as Black Americans, we're incredibly resilient. Number two, we're undercapitalized. And I know that Bishop is going to talk a lot about this, so I'm just going to briefly touch on it. But we are undercapitalized. We're undercapitalized as business owners, small business owners. The prediction is that a third of them will not open again as a result of COVID. And I think as long as we are in this moment, that third's going to grow and grow and grow, unfortunately. And here in New York City, small businesses employ half of the population of the workforce. So the undercapitalization of small businesses is really tough. One of the things that we say in our State of Black New York is that over 52% of Black New Yorkers make $50,000 or less. So we're both undercapitalized as small business owners, and we're undercapitalized as members of our households. And so that's the second thing about Black New Yorkers, where we are right now. But at the same time, and I heard you, Pepper, talk about this is going to be an optimistic conversation, we are also well positioned. We are well positioned in a way that we have never been before. As people walked and marched and protested with George Floyd, they were pushing for radical changes. And here in New York State in particular, we were able to put in place the Say Our Name legislation in a very short period of time. People marveled, how in the world did you put together this whole suite of changes looking at policing? And we were able to do that because we had an African-American woman, Andrea Stewart Cousins, who was the leader of our state Senate. We had a gentleman who was the leader of our assembly. And because of that, because they were well positioned, we had the legislation that was already there, that our state legislators were able to pull out of a drawer and say, wait, I've been trying to get this passed, this anti-chokehold ban for years. Now let's take the advantage of this moment and get it passed. And so we were able to do that because of the amazing ability to be well positioned. And so I'll stop there, but I just want to say for now, I see that Black New Yorkers and Black Americans are resilient, we're undercapitalized, but we're well positioned for change.
Excellent. I didn't even have to summarize that. Thank you very much. That's a nice start for our landscape. And I'm glad you have the undercapitalized information too. We don't want to stick our heads in the sand about the challenges with the community. So thanks for including that. Bishop, from your perspective, where's Black America today? How do you view the landscape?
Thank you, Pepper, for having me, and it's great to be on with all of you. I think Arva really touched on some things that I just like to add on to, but from a different angle. I think we're in a very powerful position, and here's why. If you look at the state of Black America and America's culture and cultural influences, we are probably establishing our culture and setting cultural trends in almost every area. When you think about culinary, the influence of Black America is in the culinary arts, the influence in the fashion, you know, as my kids would say, our drip influences everyone else, right? When you think about music, our style of worship, in many different areas, we have found our cultural influence to be significant and have started to awaken to bargaining these chips for better products, services, and resourcing of our community. But there is one area that I'm very passionate about where we aren't influencing the culture positively, and that is about money, okay? Mm-hmm. And so we influence every area of the culture except for money. And so part of our challenge right now is most of the resources that are addressed towards us in terms of building our wealth focus on a very low-end problem of budgeting and restriction and saving. But we have bigger issues of that in our country. The state of Black America right now, particularly worsened by COVID-19 and Trump administration policies, is this. Black income is still half that of whites. Black unemployment still is significantly higher through every up and down in the economy than white unemployment. Black college degree holders, their degree holds less value for the same job as a white high school dropout. Research shows that. And so, as Arva said, we're also undercapitalized. I mean, many reports about the access to capital for Black venture ideas and being under-resourced from the venture capital community for new products and new technology that we are driving and creating. So while we have this greater cultural influence, we're not fully capitalizing and able to build out wealth in terms of property ownership, business ownership, and frankly, very little investment in the market. And here's the futuring on this. So here's where I am right now. We talk about the wealth gap, which is significant, right? So, you know, the average white family having a net worth of almost 10, depending on the study, up to 13 times the average Black family. And that's a significant issue. But I want us to peek ahead to the future and what we need to do, because right now we're staring down the barrel of a $68 million transfer of wealth. I call it the great wealth transfer tsunami, like a tsunami wipes it out. There are some studies that say that this wealth transfer can severely impact the Black community. In other words, 25 years from now, a 20-year-old who's today 20 and at the age of 45, they're gonna have a significant capital disadvantage and competitive disadvantage in the marketplace when starting a business and so many other things they wanna do in life, because their peers will be inheriting a significant amount of wealth. And the real concern with this wealth transfer that's coming down the pike is there's only 3% of that is targeted to be from one Black generation to another. So while we have this great cultural influence, I think it's also a great time for us to start having these discussions, putting the mechanisms in place, right? We need policy. There's the policy solutions that we all understand. We're talking about reparations and other things, but there's also the corporate, like your space, drawing corporate responsibility to the forefront beyond just a press statement and writing a check, right? Substantive any programs that create opportunity, but also on a very personal level, we're gonna have to do some things to address this kind of wealth gap burgeoning that definitely COVID, every study you look at, COVID increased the wealth gap even further than where it was. And so the real effect on this is that, again, it creates a long-term competitive disadvantage and a worsening capital base. And so I think we have an opportunity here, and I'm glad that momentum, I think the summer of 2020 really shifted the momentum around a lot of conversation. But I think this is one not only are we ready for, but others are ready for to invest in our communities.
Thank you so much, Bishop. I love that you brought attention to the fact that when we think about influence, we influence every area except money. That was interesting. How our degrees have less value. That was interesting. And I want to add to that, I'm optimistic about the Black community and wanting to leave wealth. I've done a number of studies with banks, and we're hearing that that is on their radar, is to leave money to the next generation. So thank you so much for that, those insights. Cheryl and Tiyale, when we think about who is Black America today from a marketplace perspective, what do you say, Cheryl?
So listen, who we are is actually who we're showing up to be. And there are 46.8 million of us. So that's nothing to sneeze at. That's not a number that you can ignore. And I think the watershed year of 2020 highlighted and showcased exactly how strong we are when we are acting collectively, when we have our allies who are also acting with us. And with this 46.8 million of us who are there, we are actually putting about $1.5 trillion into the U.S. economy. So, Bishop, while we're not necessarily sharing the wealth from generation to generation just yet, and while we are not necessarily investing just yet, we are indeed contributing to the U.S. economy at a number more than most countries in the globe, across the globe, are contributing, if you look at their GDP. So I want that we're almost at $1.5 trillion. And I think that that's really worth mentioning. We also represent a strong part of the South. And you can't look at what the 2020 presidential election highlighted without recognizing the value and the contribution that Blacks brought to that election process. More than 55% of us live in the South. The South really showed up and showed out during that election. And as a result, what we're seeing is that suddenly those Southern states that were once red are turning blue, and we're getting a lot more respect. And that's because of the African American population. 7 out of the top 10 states for the African American population is in the South. 7 out of 10%. I'm sorry, 7 out of 10 of them are in the South. Texas leads the #1 state of all African Americans in terms of population, the state of Texas. And again, we know that it was one of those pivotal states that everyone was concerned and worried about. The people in Texas, the African Americans in Texas, just to show you who we are, they spend and pump into that U.S. economy for the state of Texas about $117 billion. So again, when you take into consideration what this means from an election year, you can see where that power actually comes from. And I think it's also important to understand from a demographic perspective how young we are. We're young, we're fab, we're beautiful, we're young, gifted, and Black. In fact, the median age for Blacks is 32, which is about 11 whopping years younger than the non-Hispanic white population. And I think it's also interesting to note that right now, almost 27% of the Black population is under the age of 18. That means as that 27% grows, they're going to start voting. And so you're going to see even more growth. The population growth is between now and 2060 is expected for African Americans to grow by more than 20%, a growth of 20% rate, right? At a 20% growth rate. The non-Hispanic white population is declining rapidly. The reason this is important about who we are and where we are today is because those kinds of numbers impact fear.
They do.
People are afraid of growth. That's why you see such an uprising across the country. And that's who we are.
Absolutely. That's excellent. I didn't know about Texas. I'm so glad you broke that out. I see our spending power has gone up to 1.5 trillion. I'm also happy that you mentioned and we talk about the Black remigration, moving back to the South. And it's not just older people as well. It's younger people.
Younger educated people, more educated than those who were already there. Yeah.
Exactly. And so this is, that's excellent so much. I'm so glad you came with the stats. Great. My brother, Tiyale, where are Black people today? What's the landscape that you see from a landscape or from the marketing place perspective?
Yeah, I think this year has been amazing. And that trifecta of Trump, COVID, and George Floyd has definitely impacted a few things. And I think we've seen it at BET as we have seen this renaissance happening of Black people. But what I want to talk about is the awakening of Black people. We are right now is that we have awakened to what I would argue is one of the single most important aspects of existence, which is self-respect and accountability to self, and the idea that I deserve it. Right? I think I would argue when we do a lot of research at BET on African Americans, and what I find in this Gen Z generation, I'll give you an example. Here's a quote that we pulled from a young female in her 20s. She said, "I am not going to go into relationships like my mother and my grandmother did. Those rules that my mother and grandmother gave me about I'm gonna stand by this man, even though he treats me wrong, are not rules I'm going to follow. I'm going to chart my own path because I deserve something different. I understand that what they dealt with is what they had to deal with. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show up fully as a fully formed person and look for a partner in that way." So imagine when you take that attitude and bring it to the workplace. No longer are young African Americans saying, "I'm going to just be thankful you gave me a job. I'm going to stay here for 30 years and be quiet and get the pennies you give me while I invest all my talents in and pray that I get a minimal pension." When I go, they're saying, "No, I want ownership." Why? Because I deserve it. And the idea, the awakening that has happened because of these three things in many ways, and fueled by this younger generation who had a Black president. There's something very different in your mind when you're in high school and your president's Black, regardless of your situation. But now with that piece, coupled with what we're seeing now, the awakening has come where now Black America is saying, "I'm actually here. I'm going to demand what I want. And I'm going to show up. I'm not going to expect you to give it to me." And I think that's why you see the elections playing out the way they are. These people have always been there. What's different in 2016 in Georgia than in 2008? The difference is I see myself as a part of this society fully. I fully see myself here. And when I fully see myself here, I now can show up. And I think voting now becomes important. Voting now has become something that I just do versus voting becoming something that's a chore or a hurdle to jump over. I'm going to show up at the polls because I see myself fully represented in this society. And I think that awakening is what's going to be the biggest pivot for our culture moving forward.
I love that. I love that because I'm seeing that awakening. So that Bishop can play into when you talk about wealth building, because we're hearing that from young people. One of the things too that I wanted to add, Tiyale, to your point about the awakening of self-responsibility, accountability, I deserve it, is this attitude about being unapologetically whatever. Right. So definitely unapologetically Black is in there. I love this idea about ownership and showing up. So we're gonna, keep going with that when we think about, and Tiyale, and I think all of you hit on this as well, but let's talk about this a little bit more. So then what does the future look like then for Black people? And I think, so let's go back in reverse. So what is our future? What does all of this mean then? And Tiyale, you kind of kicked that off a little bit. So let's go back in reverse. And Tiyale, how do you want to add to that? Or if what you just said, because it's really a wonderful, optimistic way to look at our community.
Yeah. I think that I'll just add to it is how we will then turn that into action, right? And I think what I see happening is now as people have that awakening, now I'm going to show up fully. So I now demand more, I expect more, and I now demand more. So when I expect more, I can then demand more. I should then get more, right? When all the pieces are in play. And to the point of going back to the work that I did with Arva in the Urban League around Black New York, which is a microcosm for what you're seeing in America. What we're realizing now is that people are opening their eyes to the disparities. The disparities are now very real, right? I will share an example with a young man. We did a piece of work on Black men at BET, and I'll never forget this interview. Young man from Detroit said he grew up in the inner city. He was very smart, went to he went to a specialized high school. He got to college, predominantly white college in the suburbs. And what he said when he got there is that he ended up becoming depressed because he saw the gravity of the disparity. Oh, these people just leave their bicycles unlocked on the lawn. What world do you live in where you're not even worried about your basic safety? And he said he saw that and that was one of his fuel. That was his motivation. He turned that into motivation for himself. So what I think that we'll do is now that we see this, we can now begin to turn this into motivation and to address the disparities that we're seeing in education, the disparities that we're seeing in school funding. We can now begin to turn and action those things. And then back to the personal responsibility, my last point, we can turn it back into how we save, right? Because a big part of why we contribute so much is that we spend roughly 98% of our income. Our effective saving rate amongst African Americans is under 2%. And that we are saving nothing. We are spending a lot of money. And what we have to then realize is say, oh, if I forego this thing and then save, that's another way for me to be empowered to either buy a house, to pass on. And I think we're starting to realize those pieces. I'm hoping that is where we will go to really action what we're seeing right now.
Exactly. I love it. There's an old term, badge value, that we've been using for years, but it's still very real for us in terms of wanting to confirm and create how we want to be perceived. And that pushes us into the spending in addition to our history. Cheryl, when you think about the future of Black America, what do you see?
So I have to use that old phrase, that cliche saying, the future's so bright, we got to wear shades. Just within the last couple of weeks, in January, right? Not only did we see a African-American woman become vice president of the United States, not only did we see Walgreens name a Black woman as a CEO of, a major corporation. We also have seen Blacks stepping into our power where we see there is a lack, where we see there's a gap, where we see there's a need. I know in the news a couple of weeks ago, there was a story about Calendly. And for those of you who use this, it's a appointment scheduling app. I had no idea that it was founded by a young brother and based out of Atlanta. And it is in the news because it raised a $350 million investment, which now values the company at more than $3 billion. That just happened a few days ago in January. And then you also see the likes of Shonda Rhimes saying, you know what, ABC, I don't like how you treated me. And so I'm going to take my ball, my bat, and I'm going to go play on somebody else's field who respects me. I think that's what you're talking about, Tiyale, where we are no longer willing to just sit back and accept business as standard quo. We recognize the value that we're bringing to the table, and we need you all to recognize it too. And I think that's the direction that we're headed in.
Oh, I absolutely love it. Very, very optimistic and part of the awakening. So Bishop, you were very had a lot of good optimistic points, but you also, pointed out some things about the Black community where we need to do better. So what do you think is the future for Black America from your lens?
Well, yeah, I want to tie into something that Cheryl and Tiyale just mentioned, a couple of statistics that are very important. So when we talk about 1.3 to 1.5, heading towards $1.5 trillion in spending power, that is very significant. But where we are going with this, and I think where the real awakening is to ownership, not income, wealth, not income, not spending, but investing. So what I'm hearing, particularly with the next generation, and we saw this even recently with the whole GameStop and GameStop thing, there's a whole new wave of protests, even financially, right? And so I think we now must towards the spending power we have, from the spending power we have towards the ownership power we have, convert spending into ownership, right? Because Black ownership is everything. Yes, I think there's awakening to us wanting to pass down wealth at it from every generational point of view, but you can't pass down what you don't own, because ownership in America is freedom. So thus we have to own more business and property. Now, here's what we can do. I think we're going is, and I think we saw this in the summer, Black spending power is significant, particularly when it's driven. Part of Martin Luther King's whole economic agenda was controlling the use of Black dollars to call corporate brands to the mat for how Black folks were treated and how Black folks were resourced with products and services. So we need to get back to that type of thing and move beyond any fad nature of, buying Black, but really get serious about using those dollars. And I think you're starting to see that in many different areas, because think about this. If Black people, here's a study that shows that if Black people just spend 10% more with Black businesses, it would create 1 million jobs, right? Now, that's significant. Why? Because after the federal government, Black businesses are the largest employers of Black people. Most people don't know that. We're the largest employers. So reinvesting those dollars in our community are very significant. So I think that you're going to see a lot more of that, a lot more awakening to directing dollars and creating closed circuit economies where we can, like what happened around the turn of the century in places like Durham and Atlanta and Tulsa. We're going to see closed circuit economies where we're trying to direct our dollars and convert spending into ownership. And by the way, I want to say something about this. Business ownership is significant in terms of reducing the wealth gap and creating wealth. Why? Because studies show that a profitable business can increase Black family wealth by 4.5 times. In other words, owning a profitable business has the greatest influence on you being able to close that, us being able to close that wealth gap beyond policy changes, beyond acts of corporate responsibility. Owning, so I think you're seeing this now. We especially see this last thing with Black women. First of all, I'm flabbergasted by the results of Black women. I mean, just look at this call. I mean, 3 women, 2 men. Now watch this. Black women really need our dollars. They really need, if we're going to spend 1.5 trillion, we need to be spending it, particularly with Black businesses, but especially Black women, because 89% of all new women-owned businesses are Black women. Right? So even though they only make up 39% of the population, so Black women are killing it. And so even in our project, what we're trying to do with our platform, we use, Black professionals throughout every area. Why? To recycle those dollars in the community, because as Cheryl said, we're going to spend $1.5 billion. The great opportunity we have, and I think people are awakening to, is not just pooling resources, but directing resources and putting those dollars in the hands of Black professionals and Black business owners to perpetuate this economy that we really need. And I think it's an exciting opportunity. And the last thing, young Black men are really where it's at as well, because I spent a lot of time, coaching, mentoring young Black men on their finances, in their lives, and their families. And I also think you're getting ready to see a huge renaissance, and some of the stuff Tiyale talked about really hits on this, a huge renaissance in young Black men understanding that there are many opportunities, particularly in the area of ownership. And you're already seeing numbers to see younger Black men and women opening businesses, whereas before many waited to as a second career or later in their career to start a side hustle. But kids are coming out of school now and they're opting to just start a business, right? Because if there's a ceiling, I'll break it. I'll just create my own. and create my own room, and there won't be a ceiling. So I'm very excited about our potential and where we're going with this.
I love it. And I love that Tiyale's awakening from the first question, where are we, has spilled over. You know, he talked about it in that sense in terms of where we are now and in the future and possibly even down the road. I'm glad too, Bishop, that you mentioned young Black men. That was one of the questions I was going to ask, because there's so much emphasis on Black women, but there are a lot of wonderful, good Black men. We have 2 of them on this call. We have several of them in our MOBE organization. I love that Ed Gordon talked about Black men and positive Black men in his book, Conversations in Black. He also talked about the challenges, but I'm happy to hear you mention that here today so that we will not forget our brothers. Arva, to wrap up this question in terms of the future of the Black American community, what do you see as the CEO of the New York Urban League from that lens? What are you seeing from there and personally?
Sure. Well, Cheryl, I wanted to thank you. I do believe that the future is very bright. I also think that the future is complicated. And the reason why I say it's complicated is because the work that we're talking about doing is literally taking apart systematic racism. There's a old saying that if something was easy, that it would be done already. And so the work that we are trying to do and starting to do right now is not for the faint of heart. It is going to be beyond one march, one rally, one summer. And it's going to take a lot of work over time. I started out in my first comments talking about the Say Her Name legislation that was passed in New York State, and basically asked for really landmark legislation that said that we can look at a police officer's record and say, wait a minute, if this police officer has knocked somebody in the head in Oklahoma, he can't come to California and knock somebody in the head here, right? So we're actually going to be able to look at the history of misconduct of a police officer, right? So it's wonderful that that was put into place, but the fact is there's a lot of people who are moving to push back on that, right? And so the work that I'm involved in, I'm currently a co-sponsor of a commission that's our governor has called for an executive order for every police municipality to look at how they're interacting with the community and to put together a set of recommendations. And so as we're putting together the recommendations, we have a police commissioner who has a lot of good things at heart, but is also a police commissioner, right? So he is looking out for his men in blue, right? And so we're at the table trying to think about the work of the community, and we're pushing against some long-held beliefs, some long-held systems, some things that are policies, some things that are practices, some things that are in law. And it's not going to be, one summer that's going to get us to dismantle that. And so I think that while the future is bright, I think that we have to stay in it. We have to stay in it for the long haul, because change is going to take a long time. One of the things that I really appreciated about Tiyale saying that we are awakened. I like awakened more than woke, because if you're woke, you can fall back asleep again. we cannot be woke in this moment. We must stay awakened.
Oh, I love that. We're going to hold on to woke too, because it's so important for our community to stay woke. I mean, it's a charge to pay attention to what we're doing, but I love that awakening and I love that definition. I love that you talked about how the future is bright but complicated, that we're taking apart, we have to think about dismantling systemic racism and reminding us that that is not going to be a simple task, and it's not going to happen overnight. We are seeing, when it comes to accountability, a number of groups of people that are holding a lot of corporations accountable. Those corporations that have stepped out there. I think the ANA took out a manifesto and they talked about what they wanted to do. The ANA is the Association of National Advertisers, which is made up of senior level executives. And they took out an ad in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times right after George Floyd's murder to talk about what they were going to do. And I've been following up with them. So there's those kinds of organizations that are holding these companies accountable, collective organizations that are holding people accountable. I don't know if you or the audience are familiar with the Dove Act, the Crown Act by Dove,
Yes.
that is making sure that there is no hair discrimination in the workplace. And it is a law that has been passed in 7 states. So this is good to remember as we move forward in our conversations with our clients to share these insights that we are talking about today. This is wonderful discussion. And so finally, how do we get there? And we've talked a little bit about that in your responses. How do we get there? And I'm adding realistically, because we all have the dream and we all have the hope. Arva mentioned that it's complicated when we think about, where, what our future is. But how do we think we get there? And maybe it's what you've already mentioned in your responses. So Cheryl, how do we get there? What do you think?
So I think there are a couple of things. Number one, we have to listen and try to understand each other so that we are acting collectively and not individually. And I think it's also important, as we saw in 2020, what happens when we all come together. And I know people say that we need to have allies. I need to take it another step up. We need to have accomplices. I need somebody who is fighting right there with me, not supporting me from the sides, but who is in there fighting with me. That's an accomplice. And I think that what we need to do is to not step back as 2020 gets farther and farther away in the rearview mirror. We need to make sure that we do continue to hold companies accountable, that what they're saying on their social media posts, what they're putting out in terms of propaganda, that they are backing it up in their corridors, that they are promoting, the associates who are on the front lines doing the work for them, that they are bringing in, yes, it's important to bring in and start a pipeline of young African Americans, but you also need to make sure that you're paying attention to the people who have been there in the trenches for you. We need to make sure that what happened in 2020 is not relegated to a moment, but it continues to be a movement. And that, I think, is what we need to do to get there realistically. And cut each other some slack. One other thing, I'm sorry, Pepper, cut each other some slack if we are Black-owned businesses, right? If you have a Black-owned business, if you go to a drive-in fast food restaurant that you normally go to, and they leave your fries out, you go back and you give them another chance. But let a Black-owned business do the same thing. And what we're like, oh, I'm never going back there. They keep making mistakes. They keep screwing up my order. I really think we need to cut each other some slack as we go through this movement.
That is my mantra too about supporting Black businesses. We're definitely on the same page. But do you think we're demanding enough for systemic change, Cheryl? And when you say we, do you mean all of we as the people, Black people, the Black community, or we as leaders in crafting messages, like we, the panel that we have here? Who is the we we're talking about, and are we doing enough?
The we is collective, because so often what I have found is that there is an expectation that we as the common consumer or the common person in the population, we don't have to do anything because the leaders will do it for us. And the leaders need to know, the Urban League needs to know that they have our support, that we have their back when they take up these causes. Our elected officials need to know that the collective we have their back. And so I think it's a combination of everyone, but not one person can do this. And if you think your voice isn't strong enough, loud enough, join with someone else, because together we really can have more of an impact. But don't stand back and wait for somebody else to do what you think needs to be done. Find a way to get it done.
Got it. Thank you so much. Tiyale, how does the Black community get there realistically? What do you think the plan is? And I think, again, a lot of us touched on that in our conversation. Is there something additional to add to that?
Yeah, I think Cheryl really kicked it off. And I think the only thing I would add is I'll start off with one of my personal revelations on this journey of really understanding culture and myself. And that it sits on the foundation, my belief is that the greatest travesty of discrimination, slavery, segregation is the self-doubt that it left with us as a people. That's the greatest travesty of it all. Everything else kind of moves away. But what we have been left with as a collective is the idea that we don't think we are good enough. That I don't have to vote in Mississippi, even though we're more than half the population. We can do anything we want in Mississippi because Mississippi is more than half Black. But we choose to not vote. We choose to not demand education. Someone said to me of the Jewish faith, said to me once in New York, I don't understand how Black people allow New York City to educate their kids the way they do, because Jewish people would never stand for that.
No.
And I said, and it hit me like a rock. Like how, and I'll share this. I have a dear friend of mine who's an elementary school teacher, and I asked her, she teaches in East Orange, and I asked her Saturday, do you still have students who don't have Chromebooks? And she said, yes, there are still students in East Orange who today, as of February 1st, do not have Chromebooks. And I said, it hit you like, but it's okay, because we have to admit that we think that's okay. And so part of the healing is going to have to be, we're going to have to learn and heal from that lack of self-doubt that has been penetrated into us for 400 years, right? So with that being, the next piece, once we move on from that, I firmly believe is we have to move in this delicate balance that Arva spoke about it being hard, of that we are 42 million, but we are also individuals, and there's diversity inside of that. I speak of that as a Black gay man, where some rooms I'm allowed in, some rooms I'm not allowed in. Some rooms I can get on the stage, some rooms I'm supposed to stand in the back.
That's right.
And I'm like, well, wait, but it's all Black rooms. Why is it in the space the room changes? Because there are certain people who still don't think I should have full rights. Okay, cool. So if it's okay for you to not think I should have full rights, why is it okay then you open the door for it to be okay for a white person to say that we shouldn't have full rights? And we go down that whole road of, no, it's different. No, it's the same, because it's all rights, right? It's kind of how we show up. So I think the idea of how do we make sure that we allow for diversity and we achieve to a common goal without the assumption that we always have to be the same. We all have to do the same thing in the same way. There's room for Tyler Perry and Lena Waithe and Shonda Rhimes. They all play a very different role. We don't have to attack any one of them. Just let them all exist. It's 42 million of us. We can all enjoy that. But we have this idea sometimes that we have to eat the same food, same restaurant, same place, same school. And the last thing I'll say in that is, as we move this forward, one of my dear friends, John, always asks me, what is your ask? What is your ask? So I'm complaining that I don't like Kamala, but have you asked her for anything? What have you asked for? If I spend all my time in the Facebook feed talking about how I don't like Kamala or Biden or Trump or whoever, but I've never asked for anything, how will I ever get anything if I've never asked for it? And so I think
don't get.
we have to formulate our ask as a people, though. So that's where it gets hard. You got to get 42 million ask into one sheet of paper. We need a really good, a really good strategist to do that. But getting 42 million ask in one sheet of paper so we can be clear about how we move forward. And I'll share this as an example, borrowing from the other group that I sit in, the LGBTQ plus group. When Hillary Clinton came out during her campaign and said, I'm going to make PrEP available nationwide, that wasn't her idea. She wasn't sitting around thinking, you know what, let me go and make sure that an HIV drug is available. It was an ask from the community. You will give me support if you give me these things. I think that we do a lot of sitting around kind of expecting sometimes that we're going to get it without actually being really, really thorough and strategic, very strategic about what our ask is going to be back into the system first.
It's wonderful. I love that. There's still, I love that you brought up, how our beliefs and how we still believe things. James Baldwin has this wonderful statement about that, about how we didn't we believe the story that was told about us, that we were less than, and that's carried on generation to generation. There is a lot of pain and there's a lot of shame in our story with slavery, but we have to keep talking about it and integrating it into these conversations. I love that you talked about the diversity of Black people. Some of us are insulated, some of us are assimilated. We don't think about Black people being assimilated, but our younger people who are predominantly raised in white communities can take on that idea of that, and it's okay. It's not a judgment, and I think that's very good.
And it's still Black,
and they're still Black. Different
experience.
It's a different Black experience. Absolutely.
And you can't tell people that they're not Black enough.
Exactly. Absolutely. There's a lot that we have to do. So we only have about maybe 6 more minutes, but I want to, and I think we have a couple of questions, but I did want to get to Bishop and Arva about the plan in terms of, how do we get there realistically? When we think about the future of Black America, how do we get there realistically? Bishop, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think, everything that's been said is truly awesome. But I want to make a little shift here towards, hope is very important, but hope and faith need action, right? And so I want to speak a little prophetically to us about what we need to do. So when we talk about where do we go from here with others, and we use terms like allies and alliances, right? To keep it very simple, there's a biblical concept of repentance. And I do think we need to, at every level, ask people to repent. We need corporations to repent for practices. We need individual managers and supervisors called to repentance. What is repentance? Very simply to right a wrong. And so one of the things we should do, and we must continue to do, is continue to find our voice, right? And use that voice, as Cheryl said, collectively. But then second thing, very personally, on a very personal level, because I'm on the ground with the people. And in ministry, you're dealing with the real ramifications of life. When the light bill can't get paid, when kids can't afford to be college educated. And so I think there's 3 things that are really in my heart. I want to see us financially healed. So I do think we need to all gather around a different type of altar call. And I think the altar call has to be around financial healing and wellness. We need to heal ourselves, right? As been stated, we've internalized a lot about self-worth and value. But here, just 3 things I really think we need to get serious about. I call it no more, own more, and pass down more, which is a refocusing of our community on financial literacy, ownership, and unlocking ownership potential, and then legacy. And so those are the practical things in terms of which will undergird all the other cultural things and societal things and things we do elsewhere. But we need that kind of healing. And that's really what I'm hoping for us.
I love it. So is own more, pass down more? I'm missing one.
Own more, know more, pass down more, because they're all a subsequent order. If you can't pass down what you don't own, you can't own about what you don't know.
What you don't know. Okay, no more, own more,
pass down
more. Excellent. Thank you, Bishop. And Arva, how do we get there realistically? And then we'll probably have maybe a couple of more minutes, and because I do have a couple of questions, one for Cheryl and definitely one for Bishop.
Okay, good. Well, I have to tell you, it's always hard to speak after the preacher.
You need to stop.
So everything has been said so wonderfully and well, and the only thing that I can really add to it is where Cheryl started, and that is that we do need to work collectively. And sometimes, as Black people, as a result of what Tiyale was saying, our own feelings of insecurity and lack of self-worth, that we don't want to come together, but we have to. And so my only admonition to people is we may resist it, but it's time to join. Whether it's joining the church, whether it's joining the NAACP, whether it's joining the Urban League. If you're already a member of your girlfriends, your links, and your boule, you need to look at who you're doing your community service work with. If you're doing community service work with somebody who could, be your child, then you're not going actually into the community. You're not actually making yourself feel walking into a room and saying, I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to connect with this young person, but I'm sure going to try. We have to push ourselves, because the fact is that the divide that we have in this country between Black and white, there's a lot of divisions between African Americans as well. We talked about this already earlier in the conversation, right? So you got your degree, you got your HBCU degree, you moved out to the suburbs, you got your great job, and then how are you giving back? How are you actually meaningfully interacting with members of the community? So I encourage everybody to join.
So what's interesting, and thank you, Arva, is that when we talked about, how do we get there realistically, I'm hearing a lot of comments coming back on the Black community that our responsibility. So we have to be more responsible. And I know, God, we only have a minute, but for those marketers and brand people that are listening, who have tuned in, in a phrase or word, we've got a lot of responsibility. We have things to do, and I think that's great. What is a company's responsibility? Is it kind of what Tiyale was saying? They too have an awakening?
Oh, I'll just add my 2 cents on this. I certainly think companies, that's why I said I used a very biblical term about repentance, but it really is calling to mat those who need to right wrong. And so I think one of the things that we ought to talk about is, I do think corporations have a responsibility to advocate for Black wealth building, for the survival and the permeation of Black culture, because I think our country prospers more when all of its citizens prosper. It's not just morally right to undo the harm that's done. It also makes good business sense to undo some of the systemic damage that has been done. And I also think not just advocate, but invest, right? So corporations, again, back to where we started earlier about Martin Luther King, our dollars are important to corporations. So corporations' dollars must make an importance in our community, must do more in our community. And I think the third thing is, corporations have to, particularly, so I also own the largest Black insurance brokerage in the country, okay? And we have offices in various places around the country. Now, here's the thing. I'm often talking in my industry of financial services, when I'm outside the pulpit in the marketplace, to CEOs and trying to convince them to use their influence, their privilege, their power to remove barriers in systemic and otherwise. So yes, they certainly have a responsibility. And I think this is where we can use, a big push from the corporate side.
Great, thank you. Corporate responsibility, and what does that look like for a brand manager that's listening, or a researcher in a big corporation that's listening, or an entrepreneur that's listening? What should they do? What's the plan for them?
So I think from a corporate perspective, it's really important for you to listen to the voices of those who have a seat at the table. So the first thing is to make sure you have people who look like us at the table. And the second big thing is listen to them. When you start seeing all of these major stories in the news, like we've been seeing from major brands, and you see that they're being sued for discrimination, you know that it didn't just happen in a vacuum, that there had to have been people who inside all along was trying to gently pull the CEO's coattail to say this is happening and we should be aware of this. And when you don't listen to those internal voices, then you make yourself vulnerable as a corporation when it becomes something that's public. And so I think it's really very important to honor those that you put into places of responsibility. You can't have just figurehead Blacks on your role. This is not the 50s anymore. We're not just going to show up and just smile just because we're so happy to have a job. You need to listen to us. Listen to your people.
I love it. So invite people in, invite them to the table, invite them in the room, as Melody Hobson talks about inviting them in the room, inviting them to the table, and then listen to the voices at the table.
I want to really quickly, I know we're at time, but I think this point is centered around the idea that your strategy should not be focused around pity. It should be focused around equity. Your practices need to be focused around reconciliation. And that all boils down to the idea of don't pity me, pay me. We don't need to pity anymore. We know what it is. Pay us. So give money to charity and hire some executives to be in the space.
I love it.
That combination.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay. So we have some questions before we go. Ooh, Lord. Hold on. Here's a question for Cheryl, and I could probably contribute too. Curtis Morrow on Facebook wanted to know, where are the $1 trillion coming from in spending power?
Where is it coming from?
Yes. So we hear in the media that Black people don't have any money. Black people aren't working. And so the spending power continues to rise. So, what's up with that?
Yeah. So that one of the things in Bishop, I think we're talking about the same issue, but from different sides of the coin. But African Americans are spending across all categories, and we are rewarding brands with our money. And so when you look at how we're showing up, if you just look at COVID and how we show up at grocery stores, in drugstores, in convenience stores, more than any other group of people. When you look at how we are showing up on streaming video on demand services, those platforms, we're like shelling out a lot of money towards those platforms. You can thank us later, Tiyale. And, and so we are spending money on brands across categories, across industries. We are generally outspending what our cohorts are in almost all of the spaces. So it's not a very succinct answer. It is, we're spending across the board.
Got it. I also remember reading how the Black immigrants are contributing a lot to our spending power. I also read to higher income Black people, as we get promoted, we're earning more, they contribute to our spending power. And you raise a good point about us spending across the board, and especially, again, badge value. But when I look in people's grocery carts and looking at brands and things that they buy and what's important to them, that's great. That's great. Thank you. So from Renita Bryant for Bishop Salter, she had a question about ownership. She said ownership is definitely important for wealth transfer, but how can we balance that message causing everyone to start a business and no one wanting to work or be employed by that business? She says over 90% of our businesses are already owner operated with no employees and at the risk of closing. So will owning more businesses exacerbate the issue?
All right, so I appreciate the question, Renita. And so I just want to address just a quick context. So there's a context for why 90% of our business are owner operated, and mainly it's a capital and resourcing issue. Again, when we talk about some of the systemic effects, we don't have access to often the same capital bases that other groups historically have had access to: bank loans, equity investment, and otherwise, and even family members. Most new businesses that start are able to start with investments from family members. But if our family members don't have the excess or the margin to invest, which many of our community have not had access to those type of family members that could invest, then again, we're left to scratch, claw, and have a hustle business. Now, so while we may look at that 90%, I don't think it's a problem, because ultimately we have an income problem, not a budgeting problem. I frankly don't think Black folks make enough money. We don't have enough money, and we need multiple streams of income. So if starting a business in that 90%, that's also including side hustlers and moonlighters and every other term. And my goal is 100% of us, actually 100% of us should have those other side incomes and other business ventures where we can build up. And again, I always like to say, listen, work your 5 to 9 until it becomes your 9 to 5, right? So I don't think there's a problem with that messaging, because frankly, we still have an income problem when all things are said and done. and a side hustle or business. Now, last thing is where we also can grow is in collaboration. We've heard this word many times, pooling our resources together, investment groups. I have a friend, the Chisholm family. I mean, they started in Newark, New Jersey 20 years ago, a family investment club, and built hundreds of thousands of dollars in investment capital by working together with small dollars. I'm talking, $20, $50, a week into a pooled investment club. So we can do it for equities and we can invest in each other's businesses. So I don't think that's a problem at all.
I agree, and I think maybe Renita probably had some personal experiences or an observation, but the Black businesses that I see, and a lot of Black businesses hire family members to come in. Sometimes it's good because we want to help our family, but sometimes it's bad because family can kill and wreck your business. But I'm seeing that Black people that work in family businesses want to work there. Maybe not long term, like in other cultures where they have to take on the business. But I'm seeing more engagement with Black-owned businesses as well. There's one more question from Tammy, and it is for Cheryl. And I was looking for the number, Cheryl. Maybe you can remember. Tammy Bolden on Facebook asked, how do we get that 27%? Which is our Gen X and Gen Z, to understand that flexing and spending needs to be channeled into self-development, investing in ourselves or communities or wealth building. Maybe it's not to Cheryl, but it is to the panel. She wants to know, how do we get that's a big question long term. How do we get young people interested in investing? I am seeing young people investing thanks to, it was a little controversy, but thanks to the Acorns and the Robin Hoods, and where people can invest small amounts. There's a perception that you have to invest zillions of dollars to get in. But thanks to those small types of opportunities, we're seeing people investing change and $5 and $10 and buying pieces of stock. Anyone else seeing that, or to help Tammy to answer the question of how do we get young people to invest and save?
I think it's what you just talked about, Acorns and some of these other platforms where it used to be in our generation, you walked in, you emptied your purse or your pockets of change and you put it into a jar. And now these platforms have found a way for you to level up to your next dollar amount and put that change over into some type of an investment and watch it grow. But the difficulty is, and Bishop, I'm sure you have a take on this, is when you see that it's grown, because I do that with my spare change on Acorns. And when I saw that, I had $5,000 just from throwing in my change, my sister was doing the same thing. She took hers and she went shopping with it, right? And that's the problem is, we see the money and we get excited about it and we don't think about how we can compound that so that it will continue to grow for us. So I think it's really important not to think about new and shiny and now, but to think about what this looks like for me if I'm 20, when I'm 40, and when I'm 45.
Oh, that's excellent. And that's still, an old school way to talk to young people, but put it in relevant terms about what you can have in the future, helping them to peer and see what's in the future. So, it's time to, it's time to wrap up. We've gone over a little bit. I don't even know if we have time for a wrap up statement, or Yvonne, do you need to come on? But I want to thank the panel. This was a robust conversation, very thoughtful, very insightful. Much respect I have for all of you. I have copious notes. I will be writing articles and including a lot of these comments in my book and quoting you guys in my new book as well. So, Yvonne.
Thank you. And thank you to the panelists for a wonderful Wonderful session.
Wow.
We are switching to an every other week format. So our next MOBE Mondays occurs on February 15th. We'll be talking about Black equity and activism in sports, moderated by Mark Gray, featuring NBA All-Star three-point winner and two-time world champion Craig Hodges, Olympic gold medalist and tennis champion Zena Garrison, and ESPN journalist Scoop Jackson. And now a word from one of our co-founders, Yvette Moyo.
Hi. Oh, thank you guys so much. That was such a valuable conversation, and you really delivered. You over-delivered on my promise to our audience to have an asset-based conversation. And I do have a few wrap-up points. You all did a great job on wrapping up. I'm so excited about the language we're using. I'm so excited about the analysis. We have been saying, we make, $1.3 trillion, and what do we do with it? We throw it away. We do what we have to do as a people. That's what we've done with our money, right? Because we had no assurance of longevity.
That's right.
No assurance of longevity in job and in living. The life expectancy of Black males probably 15 years less than the white male. We don't have this robbing us from grandfathers for our children, robbing us from a possibility of husbands in a later life for Black women. I could go on, but what you all said is that we have 46.8 million Black people, approaching $1.5 trillion in contributions to the American economy. And we are going to go, and we're on our way from woke to an awakening. This is a period of the awakening. It sounds like Young, Gifted, and Black. It sounds like I'm Black and I'm proud.
Right.
That was energy. There's no stopping us now. I could just go on and on about where we are in our head and our heart. And what we have to do is all be evangelists for the masses of people who are so accustomed to seeing only the downside, because life has proven to us the reality of being in America says there's only a downside. But now is a time to think differently. And I love that, Bishop did the biblical references. I'm going to just say, unashamed, unapologetically Black and unashamedly Christian. That's to be nice to each other, to forgive each other for faux pas, for making a mistake, for not living up to the expectation, for giving and moving on to this great future that we can create for ourselves. Nobody's going to give it to us. I love the gems that we came out with.
Wow.
We talked about from spending to ownership, from downtrodden Black male to engaged Black fathers and men having businesses and contributing and living longer. COVID has showed us at least to eat a little differently, to think a little differently, to move about a little differently. We have hope, we have possibility, and we have the ability to build for ourselves. That whole thing about, no more pity, from pity to payment. From pity to payment, this is where we have to be, Black people. And for those brand managers who don't hear a place for themselves in this conversation, you are making yourself obsolete. This business cannot continue. You are not going to meet your bottom line requirements by doing things the way you've been doing them. And I wish you luck, and I wish you possibility, and I wish my people to think every time you spend a dime, because it is just like the vote.
Yeah.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so
inspired.
Thank you all for wonderful, wonderful, wonderful conversation. I have so many more questions I'd like to ask you. We'd maybe have to come back and do a part 2 on this so we can dwell a little bit deeper into this. Thank you all so much.
As a matter of fact, April 23rd is our MOBE conference, and it is a digital conference, but we can all meet back here at the same time. We have lots of wonderful things planned and great conversation. We can check in again because, we forget, we'll be in the moment and then we'd be like, oh, I'm so depressed.
That's true. I forgot about that.
So the MOBE conference is April 23rd. Please just be connected to our various platforms, LinkedIn. You could actually go back and see those 40 MOBE Mondays we've had before, only at MOBE. Only at MOBE. This is what we give you. We thank each and every one of you for being here. And I think that's all I have to say. Great evening.
Thank you.
Great
conversation. So nice meeting you, Bishop and Arva. You are now part of the MOBE family. I'll be in touch and reaching out to both of you in the future too.
Yes, and give our regards to Mark Moriel, who used to host MOBE when he was in New Orleans. When he was the mayor, he would actually come and sit in some of our sessions. And he also hosted our Real Men Cook events in New Orleans as well. We have a legacy of the Urban League, and we'd love to keep that relationship going.
All right. Thank you all so much. And thank you for the viewers for their questions and their comments. We got a lot of positive comments and good energy from our viewers. You all be well and be safe. Thank you so much. All right. Have a good